Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FAA CAA Maintenance Implementation Procedures Industry Briefing. I'm Leslie Welch from the FAA's Office of Communications. And before we get started, I have a few things I'd like to share. First, we are recording this event today, and the recording will be available immediately after the event on YouTube. I will place the link in the chat in a few moments, and we'll also share it later in the program. We will also have a question and answer portion of the program later on, but feel free to put any of your questions during the event in the Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen, and we will make sure to hopefully get to all of your questions during that Q&A. So with that said, now it is my pleasure to turn the event officially over to our first speaker, Chris Parfit. Chris?
Thank you so much, Leslie. Good morning to everybody on this side of the Atlantic, and good afternoon to those on the other side. We're really excited to spend this time today with our industry partners in aviation safety. As of yesterday, roughly 600 people had registered for the webinar, and again, we're so happy you could join us. So why are we here? Well, for the past several years, the FAA has been working with our colleagues in the United Kingdom to minimize potential disruptions to the aviation system as a result of the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, better known as the Brexit. Both the FAA and the CAA are committed to providing a seamless transition for US-based repair stations wishing to obtain a UK Part 145 certification. Many of you are already dual certificated with EASA certifications, and we believe and certainly hope that much of what you're going to see today is going to look familiar to you. The revision to the maintenance implementation procedures was signed by the FAA earlier this month, and I understand that it was signed earlier this week by the UK. It'll go into effect on January 1st, 2023. Under this revision, US-based repair stations will be able to apply for their UK Part 145 certificate. On our next slide, we're going to show you all of the team members that worked on this. But today we have several with us that I would like to introduce joining us here today. From the FAA, we've got Paul Cloutier, George Podolak, and Mark Schofield. And I'm very happy to say that from the CAA, we're joined this morning by Neil Williams and Paul Prendergast. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And now I'm going to turn it over to Paul Cloutier to get into the details of the MIP. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chris. Again, my name is Paul Cloutier, and I thank everybody for attending this morning with our webinar. I am the FAA MIP coordinator for the UK, and our webinar, we're going to go over what the maintenance implementation procedures is with the bilateral aviation safety agreement with the United Kingdom. I'm going to get into details with some of the future changes for US-based repair stations. I will cover some of the certification requirements, how to obtain a UK Part 145 certificate in the United States. And there's going to be some important deadlines you'll want to make note of about the MIP. And we'll provide some contact information. I'm sure everybody's going to have some questions once this is over, so feel free to email us, contact us for any additional questions. And as Leslie mentioned at the beginning, there will be available time period at the end for questions and answers that you may have. So to get a little background for who's not familiar with, a bilateral aviation safety agreement and MIP procedures, basically, here's the structure of what a BASA MIP is. And a BASA, it's an agreement between governments. And it basically opens the door for cooperation between the countries to provide technical support in areas such as manufacturing under Part 21, maintenance, which we're going to cover today, simulators, flight simulators, and also pilot's licensing. And as a result from the UK withdrawal from the EU, the 1995 BASA that we had back in 95 was brought back into effect. The MIP, as we see here in this structure, this is between authorities. So this is between the FAA and another country, and in this case, the Civil Aviation Authority. And a MIP allows cooperation in certification and surveillance of maintenance facilities, both in the United States and in the United Kingdom. And in support of the MIP, those who hold an EASA approval are probably familiar with a MAG. And we have a MAG in this agreement under the MIP, but this MAG, it is not a maintenance annex guidance, it's a maintenance agreement guidance. And this is due because this is our agreements only between two countries, whereas with the EASA, you're dealing with 17, 18 other countries with that. So it's an annex. And also this structure, it shows what the Part 21 implementation procedure for airworthiness, the IPA. And this IPA is very, very similar to the EASA tip. That's anybody that's familiar with the tip. And there's really no changes between the EASA tip and the IPA with the UK. And it just covers all the manufacturing portions, importing aircraft, things like that. And this structure doesn't show the simulators or IPAs because our webinar, we're just focusing on the maintenance side of this agreement. So a little background on the MIP. So the EASA, or prior to the EU safety agreement with EASA, the 1995 BASA included the IPA, and it just recognized each other's systems for Part 21 for manufacturing. And at the time, back in 95, there was no MIP in place, and the FAA had an office in London, and that office did all the certification and surveillance of over 180 repair stations. In 2011, the United Kingdom joined the EU agreement. Under the EU agreement, the Civil Aviation Authority conducted the certification and surveillance of the repair stations on behalf of the FAA. For repair stations located in the United States, the United Kingdom recognized the EASA Part 145 approval. And as Chris was mentioning, due to the UK withdrawal from the EU in 2020, the FAA and the CAA implemented the MIP, which went into effect January 2021. Under the MIP, the CAA continued to conduct the surveillance on behalf of the FAA for those maintenance facilities in the UK. The MIP continued to recognize the EASA approvals in the United States for a period of 2 years or until December 31st, 2022. So as you can see, that's right around the corner, and a revision to the MIP was necessary to continue the support under the BASA. The goal of the FAA was to transition from the EU agreement to the MIP without minimum impact on industry and the FAA workforce. And as Chris mentioned, the FAA signed the MIP this month, which includes the issuance of UK 145 certificates for US-based repair stations. And this will go into effect on January 1st, 2023. And we're in the final stages of publishing the MAG revision, which will be included for Section B, which will include the certification requirements for US-based repair stations. And some nice stuff that happened when we transitioned into the MIP. It was a lot easier to do because the UK government incorporated the existing EU aviation laws into its legal code. There are no new regulations introduced by the withdrawal from the EU. The UK special conditions under the MIP that will be applicable to US-based repair stations are very similar to the current EASA special conditions. Obtaining a UK Part 145 certificate will be a new certification activity, and it will not be associated with the EASA approval. The UK MAG Section B will contain all the certification procedures. This section is very similar to the EASA MAG Section B, but we have made quite a few improvements, and it's a lot easier to find information and user-friendly. And we're anticipating most of the current repair stations that hold EASA approval may need a UK Part 145 certificate, but that will depend on the customer's request. So now let's get into some of the MAG, and I'll get into some of the details on this. And I'm sure everybody wants to know what changes for US-based repair stations. So starting January 1st, the UK will start issuing Part 145 certificates to US-based repair stations for those who are maintaining products and articles under the CAA control. Section B of the MAG will contain all the certification requirements, and it will list the CAA special conditions. Applications for UK Part 145 certificates will be administered by your local responsible FSDO office. That office will conduct a surveillance, the certification, and make a recommendation to the UK CAA for the issuance of the certificate. And the MIP will allow a 2-year transition period to obtain the UK Part 145 certificate. And this is basically due to allow flexibility in the time requirements for us to process as many as we're anticipating applicants for a UK certificate. So some of the initial certification requirements that I'll cover. So although the UK Part 145 and the EASA Part 145 regulations are very similar, as I mentioned, this is a separate certification from the EASA approval. Applicants will use a CAA form SRG 1783, and this is very similar to the EASA form 16 that you make application under the EASA approval. There must be a need to maintain UK registered aircraft or components for fitment onto such aircraft. There will be a separate CAA supplement, which is going to be familiar to you with the EASA supplement, but this is a separate supplement. An important factor here is the quality assurance system must incorporate the CAA special conditions for the product audits and the procedural audits. Your quality system can combine the EASA and the CAA audit techniques, so you can have one audit that covers both special conditions, but it must be documented as such. So when a SIS inspection comes up, you can demonstrate that you combine the audits and you're satisfying the special conditions for both approvals. The completion of an additional 8130-3 may be used on a single product under each agreement. I know we'll probably have quite a few questions when this is over. An example. So you can have a dual FAA CAA release under the MIP, and you can issue another 8130-3 completed as a dual FAA EASA release. But they're going to be two separate pieces of paper. You cannot do a triple release on one 8130. There are also procedures in the MAG to do a single CAA release if that is necessary. Also under the BASA, the EASA tip is no longer used and has been replaced by the IPA. But again, there are no differences in the regulatory Part 21 portions of the IPA. And then once you once the FAA makes a recommendation to the CAA will review the package, and they'll issue the Form 3, which is similar to the EASA Form 3, and that is the UK Part 145 certificate. So there are other activities that we'll cover that will, the FAA will review their application, and will also review the CAA supplement. As I said, the quality assurance system will be inspected to ensure the CAA special conditions are incorporated. UK air carriers will be listed on FAA op specs, the D107. And in the MAG, there's a CAA MIP audit report, and that's used instead of the EASA Form 9 that you're used to seeing. And that report there will be filled out by the FAA, and that's what the recommendation will be made on. So you can look at this audit report and use some of those questions in there as your internal Q&A system. So there is going to be a renewal required. It's separate again from the EASA certificate, but as the FAA, we're going to try to align all our surveillance. So when we do an inspection at the facility, we can look at the EASA requirements under their special conditions, and we can combine those with the CAA special conditions and do one audit basically for the approval. And also there's a 2-year renewal period. So we're going to try to do the best we can to align the EASA expiration date with the CAA date, which will facilitate basically certification and renewals on under the MIP. And the CAA will collect the fees, and they will also issue the certificate. So the FAA just does the audit, we're their eyes and ears basically, and makes a recommendation. Some very important deadlines that you should probably take note of. So after January 1st, 2023, we'll have the MAG will be published. You can review Section B and start developing the CAA supplement. There's an example in there, just like under the EASA MAG. And what we're recommending is 120 days prior to the expiration of the EASA certificate, submit your application. And that's for aligning these dates so we can do our surveillance all in one visit, things like that. And so we're not overwhelming the CAA with 500 certificates or 500 applicants in 1 month. So we're trying to align that, and we understand there's some EASA renewals are probably going to be coming up in January and February, and you won't have enough time for the 120 days. But we can make your application when you can, and we can work with those renewal days and getting them aligned in the future. But we just don't want a huge influx of applicants all at one time. Another thing that's very important is the CAA will continue to recognize the EASA system in the United States for at least 2 years. And by doing this, this will allow us time to obtain a UK 145 certificate and process all those applications. Articles that are released prior to December 31st, 2024 will continue to be recognized by the CAA. And then any maintenance performed on UK registered aircraft or components for fitment onto such aircraft must be returned to service under a UK Part 145 certificate after December 31st, 2024. So you basically have 2 years to obtain this. We'd like the 120 days trying to align our certificates. And then any releases that were done, say a part is sitting on a shelf, it had a FAA EASA dual release. It's at a parts broker sitting on a shelf for a couple of years, as long as the return to service is dated prior to December 31st, 2024, that will still be recognized. But any new maintenance after that date of December 31st, 2024, you will need a UK Part 145 approval to sign off that maintenance. So here's some web links that we have for the publication of the MIP and the MAG. Under the FAA's website, it's our DRS system. And I was in there the other day, and you kind of have to hunt around a little bit because it's listed under other documents, and then you have to get into some international publications tab. And under the CAA website, they have all their bilateral agreements listed right there. And the current MAG that's published right now does not contain Section B. So this was done on our very first initiation of the MIP, and it just covers repair stations in the United Kingdom. But once we publish this revision, it will have Section B, and it will be applicable for repair stations in the United States. And some other information that's coming up, we should have a FAA issued info. It's going to be called 22 UK MAG. And this goes over some of the dates. It will go out to all our operators out there. And it's just an official message of here's some dates. This is what's happening and with the MIP. And tomorrow, the CAA is going to be hosting a webinar for UK operators. So when they'll be a little bit more informed on what's happening in the United States. And so that will be for tomorrow, but it's just for UK operators. And some points of contact. So we have an international mailbox, so you can feel free to email any questions. I know after a webinar, once this is over, you'll probably have some more questions may come up. So feel free to email us. Again, I'm the FAA MIP coordinator. I'll reply back to these. And we really don't want to elevate questions directly to the CAA because, the FAA is going to be the eyes and ears. So we'll work it. Any questions at the FAA level, and if we need to elevate that, then I'll coordinate with the CAA and elevate some of the questions to their level and reply back to you. And again, as Leslie said, we have the MIP presentation is going to be available on YouTube, and I can provide this slideshow if you would like also to copy some of these links and emails. And basically, that was it for our webinar, and feel free to put some questions in the chat box, and we'll start answering some questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hello, folks. My name is George Podelic. I'm with the FAA. I'm a safety inspector, and we do have some questions coming in as we speak right now. We'll start off with the first question. Paul, will U.S. base 145s be able to do line maintenance OPSPEC D107 for UK registered aircraft in foreign countries other than the UK and US?
So the answer to that is if the FAA already has a line maintenance authorization issued for that location, then yes. So we just don't want to add additional line maintenance solely for UK operators. So if we have D107, for example, issued in Japan, and some repair stations covering one of the US air carriers there, we could add the D107 for UK air carrier.
Paul, what is the objective evidence to show the need for a UK 145 certificate?
I might call on my CAA companions here on that question. Neil, could you answer that one for me?
Yeah, certainly, Paul. Thank you all. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. What we're looking for is that you can demonstrate there's a genuine need to hold the approval. So that could be a letter from a potential customer, or you have an existing customer base in the UK that you serve. We don't want to set the bar too high. On the other hand, we don't want to ask our colleagues in the FAA to do work in order to oversee an approval that's not actually needed. So I hope that's answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, and the MAG has some information on that, but it doesn't, as Neil was saying, there is some flexibility, and it doesn't, get really specific, on details of it. So if we have any questions, our local FSDO, they can send a letter and just ask the CAA, hey, is this sufficient?
Yeah, we're happy to answer that.
Thank you very much. A repair station with the EASA authorization is up for renewal in January 2023. Do they have to submit an application for the UK now or wait for more guidance?
Well, currently, I know we'd be running into some issues like this because we don't even have the MAG published yet. So it's going to take some time to develop the CAA supplement, go through the MAG, look at the special conditions. So the 120 days was for general alignment. And for those facilities, they could probably put it off until their next renewal, like the 120 days, since it's, they won't have much time for, the renewal currently coming up in January. Or even sooner. But the big thing is we're trying to just align the dates, and it'd save, the repair stations, multiple audits, and the FAA going out and doing multiple audits. So we'd like to combine all that the best we can.
Thank you very much, Paul. Paul, will there be a notice coming out that contains the interim guidance for the UK certification process, or an advisory circular of some sort?
No, there won't be an advisory circular. We're anticipating the info to come out a few weeks ago, actually. But the info is coming out, and then, as Chris said, we've already signed the MIP, and the MAG, we're very close to getting that published. We're trying to get it out the door like this month. So once that is all available, everybody can start going through that. But the MAG is going to have all the details of the certification requirements and what is needed. It has all the forms in there, all the applications, everything's going to be fillable. So it'll be available as soon as we can get that out the door and published.
Yeah, thank you very much. I understand the UK will not be a part of the EASA. However, EASA will still be valid for other countries. How will that interface with 8130s?
So for an FAA release, we just need somebody with a 145 certificate signing off the 8130s. EASA, for facilities, for example, in the United Kingdom, if they want an EASA release, they'll have to apply to EASA to get a separate EASA 145 approval. So I'm not sure if that answers the whole question, but it's going to be separate approvals. There's not going to be a triple release. So if you're looking at FAA portion, it's fairly similar. But if you're looking for an EASA UK release, there'll be separate releases under each other's approvals.
Paul, will U.S. Part 145 repair stations be able to use its D100 OpSpec workaway for UK registered aircraft similar to EASA MAG requirements?
Yes, so we do have procedures in there, and they would be eligible to do the workaway within the United States. And then if there's workaway outside the United States solely for UK registered aircraft, we have procedures in there for notifying the FAA and also notifying the CAA so they can see what's transpiring outside of the United States.
Thank you very much, Paul. After all is completed, can or cannot issue 18130-3 with the FAA, EASA, and UK CAA release? Okay, that's more of a comment than a question. But I think you covered that already, didn't you, Paul?
Yeah. So there's not going to be a, three releases on one form, right? But you can issue, make two pieces of paper out and use each approval. But the important thing is if you're doing an FAA EASA release, it needs to meet all the special conditions under the EASA and FAA, obviously. And if you're doing a FAA CAA release, you need to meet the special conditions under that. And one of the areas where it could differ is airworthiness directives, right? So the UK can issue an airworthiness directive that the EASA may incorporate or may not, or the method of compliance may be a little different. So what we don't want is a component repaired for basically just an FAA release, and then down the road, the customer might say, oh, I need a EASA release, I need a CA release, and then the paperwork's just developed and signed off like that. The special conditions need to be looked at and ensured they're met, because they're different approvals and everything's being, demonstrated that the special conditions are met for each approval. So,
a question in regards to capability lists. Will this require a separate capability list like the CAAC, or will this recognize the FAA capability list similar to the EASA supplement?
Yeah, it'll recognize the current capabilities list under the EASA. So when the UK issues their Form 3, they recognize the current ratings and everything that's the FAA's already authorized.
Thank you, Paul. A question in regards to, in the case of the USA located UK facilities or UK FAA 145 facilities, will the IPA address major repairs by FAA DERs and or repair station DERs repairs for UK fitment?
Boy, that's a tongue twister there.
Do you want me to take that one, Paul? Yeah, Paul, I'll take that one. So the procedures in the IPA are very similar to those in the EASA tip. So the answer is fundamentally, yeah. If it's a repair design that's accepted under the IPA, then it's directly can use it. If it's something that requires validation before you can install that design or apply that repair, then that's the process that needs to be followed. But if you're already familiar with the EASA tip, you won't find the IPA very different. It was developed with the tip in mind. So, and it's been around for a couple of years now, so it's nothing new there for the guys in the design side.
Thank you very much, Neil. Next question. Will there be a letter of need from the United Kingdom similar to EASA as part of an application?
Yes, that's what we're discussing earlier. So there must be a need to be working on UK registered aircraft or components for fitment on UK registered aircraft.
Next question. So like a dual release 8130 that have specific verbiage about meeting EASA requirements, new verbiage will be needed to be added for this agreement?
Correct. So if technically it's not called a triple release, but if you want to release a component under FAA, EASA, and the CAA, you'd issue the 8130 FAA EASA release as you normally would under that agreement, and you could issue an 8130 FAA CAA release under the MIP. And there is verbiage to put in the block 12 because it will be different, obviously, from EASA. You're going to be showing the UK 145 certificate. But you can take both those 8130s and put them in the box with the component and ship it off. And I wouldn't call it a triple release, but it'd cover FAA, EASA, and UK CAA.
Thank you very much, Paul. Next question, can an aircraft manufacturer require certification to maintain a certified repair station service facility as proof of need?
If they think they have a potential UK customer, sure.
Okay. Next question, my EASA expires on February 1st, 2023. Do I have to do the UK application now?
Again, it's going to take some time to develop the CAA supplement and everything. So that's why we built this 2-year flexibility in this. And we knew the 120 days prior to expiration wasn't going to fit for everybody. So there's no reason to panic. I would start developing it and submit it when you can. And we can change the renewal dates down the road if we have to, but we're just trying to alleviate a huge influx of applicants all at the same time. And under the current EASA system, it's a 2-year period of all these expiration dates over that time period. And that's what we're trying to just have them come in, each month versus all at the same time. So there's that 2-year period that you can work with.
Paul, can the UK 8130-3 be on the back of the EASA 8130-3?
That's a good question. I guess you could save some pieces of paper on that one. Neil, would you have any input on that? Or?
Well, as long as they're separate documents and they contain the right information and they were issued in accordance with the procedures set out in the MAG and in the organisation supplement, yeah, no worries. We don't want to make this any more difficult than it needs to be, but we do need to separate, to recognise that the UK and the EU systems have been separated, and as there's no bilateral arrangement between ourselves and the EU on maintenance, and there's not likely to be for some time, then this is the way forward for the time being.
Will subcontractors also need to have a CAA certification?
So the subcontractors are going to be, the work they're performing is going to be done under the repair station approval. So as long as that umbrella is covering under our contracting requirements, they should be okay, because the repair station is going to be doing the approval for return to service.
Is there a set deadline for implementation? In addition, I am presuming separate audits will be part of surveillance, or will local FSDOs conduct audits on behalf of the CAA?
Yeah, so the local FSDOs, you'll make application to the local FSDOs, and they will be doing the audits for the UK 145 certificate. Now, they can combine that with the EASA, so it's all done at the same time. But, with expiration dates, like some are coming up in January, it may not be feasible for the first time around, but possibly the second, when you come to the renewal, we can adjust all that stuff to get everything aligned.
A question in regards to fees. Any ideas what would the renewal fees be like?
They're posted on there's a link in the mag, and it'll give the fees. I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but Neil.
Yeah, sure. Let me just see. In our fees and charges legislation, so there will be a link. They're £901 for initial approval and £538 for a renewal. So the fees reflect the work done by our colleagues in the FAA. And so this covers the fees that we charge, cover the work we do our end, and the SIS process, which will be implemented to ensure that the implementation of the arrangement has been established and is working in the way that we envisaged when we negotiated the contents of the new MIP and the MAC.
How do we resolve differences in AD resolutions in the event they differ? Is there a priority between FAA, EASA, or UK CAA, or the initial issuing organization?
Well, it really depends what the customer's requirement. What is the component being installed on? That's how I'd set the priority on it. But there could be, as I said, there could be differences in the method of compliance. So one could be, 100 hours. One could be do this within 200 hours. So the highest restriction one is the one that I would look at, but the customer's request should be what is the component being installed on to ensure the AD is complied to the state of registry, or if it's issued under state of manufacturing. Things to look at.
Can you please provide clarification? If I am repairing a part for the UK, I need an EASA dual release and a separate CAA dual release?
No. So if it's a UK customer, it's just a UK release, what you need. So you could do the FAA, CAA dual release, and EASA's out of the picture.
Is it the customer's responsibility to document, notify the U.S. repair station facility they need a UK 145 certification upon returning back to them?
Well, they'll need I went over the important deadlines of what happens in the United States. So if they need if the part's going on their aircraft, there's probably going to be requests for a UK 145 certificate for signing off any maintenance, especially after that drop dead date of December 31st, 2024. Those parts that are done under the EASA dual release, those will no longer be recognized or eligible for installation onto a UK registered aircraft. So that is the drop dead date. As long as parts are signed off before that date, they'll still be recognized. But yes, it's going to be the operator's customer's request, basically saying, hey, I need this type of approval because it's going on a UK registered aircraft.
Will a 145 repair station require an additional accountable manager for the CAA, or can the current FAA or EASA accountable manager also perform the task?
Yeah, they can have the same accountable manager. There's not going to be a requirement for another accountable manager.
This is a long one. If I need to repeat it, I will. Currently, a Part 145 line maintenance repair station, only use EASA certificate vendors, contractors on EASA registered aircraft for services we have to contract out. Will this be the same for UK CAA registered aircraft, whereas the vendor contract must be UK CAA? Example, our repair station contracts out NDT and our vendor must be EASA certificated.
Yes. Yeah. So if the vendor is doing a function and signing off with, for example, you gave NDT, so that they would have to hold a UK 145 NDT approval for doing the return to service. The EASA, if they just hold the EASA or FAA, that will not be recognized under the UK, be eligible for installation on a UK registered aircraft, or inspection wouldn't be recognized.
Okay, thank you very much. When will the newly signed MIP and related docs, MAG, etc., be posted to the FAA website?
So we're trying to get the MIP published, I think today. I think the UK is probably going to be publishing it today also.
Yep.
And there's going to be a press release also offered on the MIP. And then the MAG, again, we're in the final stages of getting our legal team to clear off on all of that and get that published. But we're anticipating it as fast as we possibly can. The MAG is it's about 100 and some page document. It's a lot larger than a MIP. But we're looking at having that as soon as possible to get that out so everybody can start looking and getting prepared with their supplements and looking at the certification requirements. But it will be listed on those websites that we listed.
What about parts that sit on the shelf for several years? Will they need separate 8130s with CAA approval after January 1st, 2024? If so, can a certificate be issued, or does the part require reinspection?
So if it had a FAA EASA dual release and it's signed off prior to December 31st, 2024, that will still be recognized under the UK CAA. If it's it can sit on the shelf for a couple of years, but as long as that it's dated prior to that cutoff date, it'll still be eligible. And any maintenance after December 31st, 2024, if the return to service date is dated after that date, they will need to hold a UK 145 certificate.
What about rotable pool parts? Example, a U.S. carrier having agreements with the EU and UK carriers. These could be sent to UK via rotable process. What then? Meaning it could be in EASA when fitment occurs?
Yeah, it's all off the date it was signed for return to service. So if it has the FAA EASA release dated prior to that, it will still be recognized. It can sit in parts pool. That's okay. So those are why some of the dates, I was like, hey, these are very important dates. And those dates are also going to be listed in the info that's going to be going out. It's listed in the MIP. So it's very clear of, where the line in the sand was drawn, because I knew we'd get a lot of questions on this, and it needed to be clearly identified in the MIP and our MAG and what satisfies the recognition for installation on a UK registered aircraft.
How about for repair stations that are rated for components that provide parts for asset pools that may be used by a UK operator? Does that constitute sufficient need?
Yeah, it should do, George. Yeah, as long as the claim is a credible one, then that's fine, because we understand that a lot of parts are provided through various power by the hour type arrangements, and the end user's not always known when the part's being maintained and put back into a pool or with the distributor.
Why is the UK deviating away from EASA?
Shall I take that one? Well, the United Kingdom government decided that when the UK withdrew from the European Union, we would also withdraw from the EASA system. That was a political decision, and the consequences of that now mean that the UK regulatory system for aviation is entirely separate from that in Europe. We did take the legislation across, which has helped us a great deal. But from now on, we have an agreement on design and production, but not on maintenance. And the rationale behind that is one that's all tied up in the state of the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And there are some bigger issues there that I think in general prevent the Europe and the UK working closer together. You could say that's a source of frustration for some of us whose main interest is aviation safety, but it is the reality of where we are.
Splendid. Thank you very much, Neil. Is it required to have a separate UK supplement, or is it acceptable to have a combined UK EASA supplement?
No, this is going to be a separate supplement. The approvals are separate. The application's separate. The special conditions are separate. So there's an example in the MAG section B of what needs to be in the CAA supplement, and it will get reviewed by the FAA just like the EASA supplement, but they will be separate. And it's similar to the EASA supplement, but it is going to be different. You know, it's, return to service is different. Some of the sign-offs on that.
We have a few more questions. What about strictly new parts, PMA parts? What about strictly new PMA parts?
So the manufacturing under the IPA, it's basically the exact, exactly as written as the tip. So there's really no changes in that. So if the acceptance of PMA parts, the UK accepts it just like we accept their parts for importing and exporting under Part 21.
Yeah, it's only critical parts that would require validation prior to them being made eligible for installation, same as the EASA tip.
What about special conditions for the CAA? I believe the question is gearing to, will special conditions be similar or differ? What about special conditions?
Yeah, so they're very similar, but they're slight variances to accommodate the MIP. But there's really nothing new because the regulations are basically the same. So they're very, very similar.
Will return to service authority need to be tracked separately from the FAA return to service, EASA authorization, JCAB, or CAAC?
I'm not really sure on what the question to. I can't get more of an example on that one. So the individuals that are designated under the FAA repair station, under the rosters that have authorization for doing the return to service, those are accepted under the CAA, under this MIP. So as long as the repair station authorizes these individuals, then they can sign for the repair station. Now, a good practice would be if you have somebody that's not familiar with the EASA, let's say, or with the CAA MIP, they can, identify those individuals as, an FAA. They can only sign for FAA release only, or they can do, FAA, EASA, CAA release. It's just how the repair station will want to manage their employees with their training and their skills and their proficiency, things like that. But there won't be like a separate roster or anything. You have anything to add, Neil?
I think the only difference is there's a special condition around human factors training, which there is for EASA anyway. So the only consideration would need to be that any certifying staff had managed to follow that special condition and had received human factors training. But if the organisation already has an EASA approval, that will be a special condition that they're familiar with.
Thank you very much, folks. Will there still be a need for an export certificate for engines in the UK?
No, we accept 8130-3 just as we have been doing for some time. So export certs only for aircraft, whole aircraft rather than engines and props.
Will new parts with an FAA 8130-3 or EASA dual release be acceptable to install on a UK aircraft?
Yeah, so new components manufactured in the US are acceptable under an 8130-3. If the part was manufactured in Europe and was released with a EASA Form 1, that's also acceptable. Again, because the UK has a bilateral with the EU where our production systems are mutually recognized.
How will return to service be handled by a 135 operator?
So 135 operator just needs an FAA return to service. So nothing would change. I'm not sure if they're talking about a 135 UK operator. I'm guessing that's probably what the question would be.
Well,
yes.
For the commenter, if they could rewrite the question and send it, I'll be more than happy to restate it. Next question. Do the major aircraft manufacturers who now request a dual release know that they'll start having a request for UK CAA release?
Yeah, so that was part of the purpose of the info, because that's going to go out to all US operators. And then tomorrow the CAA is giving their webinar to all the UK operators. So we're trying to get the message out as fast as they can, but then we do have flexibility built into the agreement, for recognition of each other's approvals. And probably back to that last question, I'm assuming it was a UK 135 air carrier, what kind of sign off. So in the MAG, there is some examples how to, sign off aircraft logbooks, what to put in there under the UK 145 approval. So if they are working on that type of operator, their CA supplement will have procedures how to do all that.
Do you foresee the UK and EASA combining the maintenance agreements anytime soon?
Probably not, but we're internally in the FAA, we're looking at how to streamline the process, because we have more agreements coming up, and so we're looking at some ideas how to streamline stuff. We're thinking of, when you look at a MAG, it really covers the certification requirements. So we're thinking if there was, one MAG agreement of how to do a certification in the United States for a foreign approval, and then have an appendix per country, is one idea, but it takes some time, and every time we've gone through one of these, there's regulatory differences, and there's little twists in the road of all these countries. Nothing's really lined up on the special conditions. Some they're just a little different here and there, and it's a tricky process to get everybody to come together and agree on stuff.
We support. I'm sorry, go ahead, Neil.
So I was just going to come in on what Paul was saying. Yeah, I think we're experiencing that too, where we're building up a portfolio of international agreements, and each one's slightly different. There was some work done in ICAO a few years ago that Paul and I were part of, that was intended to make it easier to recognise approvals issued in other countries, and it would really be good to see some energy put into bringing that work into reality and trying to harmonise the process for obtaining approvals in a much wider way. I think that could reduce burden a lot and still maintain an acceptable level of safety.
I would like to talk about this last question. We support several large customers overseas that support global customers via Power by the Hour programs. we will need to provide a repair component with both an FAA EASA and an FAA CAA 8130 tag to satisfy the UK customer needs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Folks, I want to thank you very much for all the questions. It's been absolutely fabulous. I thank you very much. And Paul, I would like to return it to you for final conclusion words, okay?
All right. Thanks again, George. But again, thank you everybody for attending our webinar. You know, we didn't dive down into a lot of the details of the MAG, but we felt we hit the highlights of some of the questions you'd really need to know, what's coming. And we're working very diligently to get the MAG published as soon as we can. Again, the MIP is going to be published this week. And I know once this is over, there'll probably be, you know, a bunch of questions. So feel free to email the international box for the FAA. That will be me, and I'll go through those and get back to you. And then again, this webinar is available on the YouTube link for anybody that could not attend this meeting. They can watch it and go through the slides, and you can show that to them. But again, thank you everybody. Thanks everybody on the panel. Neil and Pete, thank you again for joining us. And that concludes our webinar.